So far, we've been studying the period of the Renaissance, that's approximately 1300 to 1600. Out of the spirit of Renaissance innovation and their desire to gather world knowledge, there begins a period of trade expansion from about 1400 up to 1650 into the Baroque period that establishes a kind of economic dominance of Europe within the global system. And it sets up some very unbalanced networks of trade and economics and destroys some significant cultures and civilizations on both sides of the Atlantic. So we have the positive Renaissance in Europe, and we have, with the trade expansion, enormous rise in wealth, but a clash of cultures that still is with us today. Here's an image of one of the Renaissance technologies that's put to work towards these aims. This is a Portuguese caravel from 1522. The image is from 1522. The caravel was the largest European ship of its day. It adopted the Arab lateen sail to be faster and safer, and was designed to withstand long, rough ocean voyages. It was also long enough to hold firepower, and it was outfitted with brass cannons to be successful to repel enemies at sea. So with these two new technologies, which is the Renaissance is all about, they were able to do pretty exceptional things for trade. So the Europeans, and particularly the Portuguese, adapted Arab inventions like the compass and the astrolabe to improve navigation. They also, as you'll remember, the Renaissance is all about a rebirth or renewal of classical knowledge. Well, this is an image of geography by Ptolemy, who wrote it in 150 AD, but in Greek, and it was later translated into Arabic, and then later translated in the very early 1400s into Latin. And this has a huge impact on navigation and map making of the Renaissance. Also want to underline, though, that before the Renaissance, the Arab world and the Arab traders really have elaborate networks keeping the known world connected through trade. They're slower than the kind of sea travels that the caravels get up to, but these are kind of caravan that go annually or every 2 years, and so people rely on them. They keep cultures in contact. It's a way in which the Arab world also collected manuscripts and saved manuscripts for later on, and the Renaissance benefits from this, their culture of restoring and holding on to manuscripts. But also it's a kind of network of communication. And what you can see here is there's not only the overland route from the Middle East and from Asia into Europe, but we also have a coastal trading route that stays very close to the coastline. And during this time, before the Renaissance, people are doing coastal trading, but it's in short trips. And also, this is critical to know about, I believe, there was an Arab trade network in Africa, in the African continent, that covered and circulated around the Sahara Desert. And so this is how they bring Islam to the northern part of the African continent, and it's also how many of the wealthy West African empires develop their wealth and their prosperity through their key positions on those trade routes, where they traded with the Arabs in salt, gold, and critically in slaves. So this is the Silk Road, the famous Silk Road that this image purports to be representing between 1000 and 1400, but essentially the problem here is that it gets blocked in 1453, and it gets blocked because the Ottoman Empire lays siege to Constantinople, and finally is victorious and takes over Constantinople, and now the trade routes of the Silk Road is blocked by hostile Ottoman Empire, and so the Europeans can no longer use this overland route, and their overland route is key for them because it's how they access the luxury goods of China. So the fall of Constantinople, it blocks this overland travel. The Western European countries scramble to find alternatives because there's an enormous amount of revenue that comes through trade in luxury items like porcelain, silks, herbs and spices, tea, and so the wealthy of Europe want to purchase that, and so the people who can find that water route to China to access it will make their fortune. So the first people to crack it are the Portuguese, and they are able to take their caravel ships down along they reach the Congo River in Africa, they get past the Horn of Africa and reach India, and they make extensive forays into Asia. And so the Portuguese really get started, and then the Spanish follow them. The reason I put this kind of ugly map up is that in the orange, you can see the Portuguese locations where they've managed to really get a foothold in, and they particularly are successful in establishing trade in slaves in the western coast of Africa. And on the left-hand side in green, you have the Spanish, who have managed to get a major foothold in Mesoamerica or Central America, and down the right-hand side, coastal side of South America, and that is where they source silver and gold beyond their wildest dreams. And by sourcing that silver and gold, they managed to destroy the exceptionally incredible civilizations of the Aztec, and they managed to wipe out hundreds of thousands of people, in part because they carry illnesses they're not aware of, for which there's no immunity in those places, and in part because they literally work the indigenous people to death in the mines. And so this becomes a very dark and brutal basis for trade and prosperity in Europe. And so we'll look at that in the next slide coming up, where we look at the trade triangle. So just to summarize, during this period between 1400 and 1650, we have imperial ambition. We have the new innovations of seafaring. We have the synthesis of classical knowledge about navigation. And we've got the disruption to overland trade routes, all driving this frenzy of global trade and conquest. The Silk Road has been blocked. One of the things I should just emphasize is that after the Reformation, that Martin Luther begins questioning the functioning of Catholicism, Protestant religions take hold in Europe, and countries increasingly identify as either Catholic or Protestant. That adds an animosity to and a kind of frenzy to their rivalry, which is already fueled by the fact that we have a real growing population in Europe in the 1500s. They are slowly becoming nation states, and so the rivalry for wealth and territory, it becomes intense. I thought it would be interesting to include this image. We have on the left, we have a representation of how the Europeans saw their endeavors in trade and conquest and exploration as blessed by the Virgin Mary, that they're basically heaven sent or sent by God out to the indigenous people of the world. On the right-hand side, we have an interesting image from Japan, from a painted screen, where the Portuguese, again, are traveling or trading, but here they are, the title of this work is Southern Barbarians. So to the Japanese, they seem like a barbaric lot, not in any way, sent from heaven or God sent or blessed by some great deity, but in fact quite inferior. So according to the Japanese of this time. So I just think it's good to keep in mind that we're very exposed to the kind of heroic narrative about this age of exploration, and I think it's good to keep in mind that that's just one perspective and it's one interpretation, and there are many. Unfortunately, we don't have access to as many versions, because many of the cultures that received Europeans and had the first contact, some of them were able to record narratives, but many would have recorded and documented the first contact with Europeans, and that cultural material has been lost. Okay, this is just a wide shot of the same content. We have the Portuguese caravel arriving in Japan on the coastline, and they're being greeted by the Japanese officials. So this is a kind of an ugly map, but I think it's helpful to show the two different success stories, one of the Portuguese and one of the Spanish. So the Portuguese are in orange, the Spanish are in green. And to compare that to another map, this was created in 1502. We don't know who made it, but essentially I think it's interesting because it shows the known world based on these travels, the travels of the Portuguese and the Spanish. And we've got emphasized here in green and elaborated on the coast of Africa, the western coast of Africa, the coast of Central and South America, and also the Caribbean islands. And so this becomes a critical triangle of trade as things develop. So this triangle of trade basically is based on the notion that Europeans arrive in Africa, trade in slaves, take slaves, and transport them to Central America and South America, where they're used as labor force to extract things like silver, gold, later work on cotton plantations and sugarcane plantations. The Europeans then bring those raw materials back to Europe and either process them, and if they process the sugar or the cotton, and then transport it back to Africa or India for sale to those markets, or they bring the raw silver and gold and use that coinage to buy luxury items in Asia, particularly in China. China developed a system at this point where they started to demand that their taxes be paid in silver, and so there's this huge demand for silver in China, and there's the Europeans race to provide them with all the silver they can possibly want, and they, in doing so, destroy hundreds of thousands of lives in the Americas. So this trade triangle between Africa, the African continent, and the Americas joins up with a kind of loop with China. And so I just wanted to emphasize that it's at this point where we have an economy that's really interdependent, but extremely out of balance. And next week, I'll talk to you a little bit about what that does and what it means culturally for not only the African continent, but also in the Americas. And I want to particularly talk not just about conquest, but about the kind of civilization and societies that were there before the Europeans arrived. So you can get a sense of what's lost and what's of such extraordinary value that there are still ways to access and appreciate and learn about. So I won't go into this, it's really kind of an economics thing, but the Columbian Exchange is a term that students have asked me about, and it basically is referring to the fact that the Europeans bring certain plants and animals and an enormous amount of diseases, I mean unwittingly of course, to the Americas. And from the Americas they extract exceptionally huge amounts of new plants and foods, which then go on to feed and nourish Europeans. They have longer lifespans, they grow them in Europe, and it changes both the ecology of Europe and the health of Europeans. It adds to their strength. And that's it for my lesson. This is just included as a review slide. More on this next week.